Let's do some quick fire questions. What's a tech buzzword you wish would go away?
AI related stuff is just too much for me. Maybe I'm just not in the loop, but I think it's an exciting area in a certain sense. But for me, it's just something that I don't spend that much time. It's only when I come on podcasts like here that I actually end up thinking about it all that much. I guess specifically, I think vibe coding, I get it's good for prototyping, but it's at a certain point, engineers need to engineer.
What's one idea you had about web dev in 2015 that you still believe today?
We talked about it almost this whole
It's
the idea that like you do need to put control in people's hands to a certain degree. You don't need to know how to build your tool from scratch, but you at least need to understand what the abstraction is. So I think it's important that things aren't too magical. At the base, you need to at least be able to have a good mental model of things. And that's what led me to build Solid. It was about transparency. It was like what you see is what you get. And that hasn't changed in the last 10 years.
What's the biggest myth about performance in front-end frameworks?
I don't know if it's the biggest, but this one bugs me enough. Like it's this idea that like by adding a technology, like say adding signals to something, suddenly it's faster. It's the same fallacy I was talking about earlier, but just adding more abstractions, adding more things, that makes it faster. The reason signals frameworks are fast is because they remove something. Like if you have signals and you make that your core, then that's all it's doing, then that can be really performant. But if you say mix your signals with your virtual DOM, well, you're probably taking on the overhead of the virtual DOM and the overhead of signals. You're kind of getting the worst of both worlds. Like just taking your React and jamming signals into it won't make React faster. It'll probably make it slower, most definitely. And that's why when people ask the React team if they're going to move to signals, I mean, no, they have a very clear path, and that path is exclusive to this. Like, sure, you can use it for state management, but it's not going to like improve React all of a sudden. There are architectural constraints. Not every feature is just something you can nail on and be like, now it's better.
Can you think of a specific, like either project or type of project wherein this kind of fine-grained reactivity is necessary and like virtual DOM and like diffing like this doesn't work?
Honestly, necessary? No. I think there's benefits for ergonomics. I think there's benefits for performance, but I don't know if there's anything where it's like you need this, because the beautiful thing about the virtual DOM is it's like relatively good enough for most things. And the thing is, people were fine reloading web pages for a long time. I think that idea of like what the need is a sliding scale, and people's expectations will rise. There's places that obviously fine-grained really excels, which is places where you're doing lots of minuscule data updates, things like, large tables or dashboards or, stuff like that. It's not a matter of you can or can't, like, I guess another really cool example is people using it for video games. Yeah, because one of the interesting things is we have like a 3JS universal render port, like one of our custom renders in 3JS. It's like, if you look at like the React solution, people actually have to opt out of the React state management. Like they use a whole different state library to actually do it performantly. You might still want to do that with Solid, but you don't have to. Like the signals are performant enough. You don't have to worry about like re-renders. So it is actually works quite well. So there are situations where it makes a lot of sense. I said there wasn't. Low memory devices are still a thing. We're very, very attractive on television devices. That's actually where some of our like bigger known things like Universal NBC, like Solid's used on television apps. You might have used Peacock or something like that. We had some interest even from Netflix in that zone. It wasn't a plug and play swap from React, so it wasn't as easy to make that move, but for them. But like generally speaking, like there are places where it makes a lot of sense to have these qualities, but in a lot of places it will be good enough.
Yeah. What do you think is the hardest part of maintaining an open source project that most people aren't cognizant of?
There's a lot day to day. People will come in and they'll see their issue or their thing that they care about. And the truth is, when you're open source, your work is always in public. So there are so many different people you're catering to, and you're directly talking to the public. There's no insulation in the way. Like I worked on product teams and companies, and there's customer success team or whatever. Like open source, your customer are the developers, and you're interacting with them directly. So like, I don't know if this is like a hidden thing, but it's just there is like a huge amount of just bookkeeping, in the sense of like, not like money or anything, like just people and
Mm-hmm.
capabilities and projects. And people generally only come in for their like narrow slice, so they don't see the breadth of it all. It's hard to keep on track of it when you also want to build stuff or you want to try new ideas. There's been more visibility on this recently, where you see open source maintainers kind of like respond back to rude people or whatever.
Yeah.
And but it's just like, there's those people on one extreme, but like there's everything in between.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, these projects end up small, but they become massive. Like,
Yeah.
and it often without the infrastructure that you would find at like a funded company. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, that can make things difficult at times.
What's one thing fine-grained reactivity can do that the virtual DOM just can't?
Yeah, it's funny. Normally, I wouldn't say like any technology can or can't do anything, because you can always work around it and find the escape hole.
Mm-hmm.
Like find ways to like make it work. So it's like in your project, I'm sure there's a way you can make it do what you want.
Yeah.
But there are benefits that people are only starting to realize right now, especially seeing fine-grained rendering coming into stuff like Svelte 5 or Vue Vapor, and you
Mm-hmm.
can start seeing this community start kind of thinking about like how we approach things differently. And I think the thing that people don't understand is, by writing your code this way, you are giving your application knowledge of how data flows through your app.
Mm-hmm.
And this is incredibly powerful, because it does mean you can do things that just don't make sense or don't work in the virtual DOM. Like, for example, you can fetch some data somewhere in your app, and if that data errors out somewhere deep where it's being used, like say rendering, and you like hit an error boundary or something, well, if you retry the error boundary in a typical virtual DOM library, like, I think this is why React doesn't have an error boundary component. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
know what to do. You have to kind of fix the error so that the next time it re-renders or whatever, it
Mm-hmm.
knows that it will be corrected. Otherwise, it's just going to error again.
Yeah.
But like with a fine-grained system, because the data dependencies, you can be like, oh, let me retry what errored, and trace the data graph all the way up to the data fetching, and be
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I'm just going to refetch what failed. Like, and this kind of power is incredible, right? So like, you can picture you have some data fetching, and then, as I said, lower down, you're like, try render something with that data, and it
Mm-hmm.
fails, and then you're just like, oh, I'm going to retry. Maybe the user has a button they can click. It can
Yeah.
self-heal, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And this is because the program understands the graph. And this
Mm-hmm.
is this capability, people are only starting to realize, it's now getting built into applications because of Solid.js or Vue Vapor. It's felt like, when you start writing your code this way, you're going to be unlocking other capabilities like this. We've seen advantages to this, like in debugging. You can actually
Mm-hmm.
be like, oh, like visualize the graph, and I'm looking forward to these kind of things working their way into more into like developer tools, like especially
Yeah.
like IDE support and stuff. Because like, what if you can use the data dependency graph to know, like, when you edit code, what part of your application could be impacted. So for me, that is some huge benefit to using fine-grained reactivity that you don't really get with the virtual DOM.